Hey y'all, welcome back to Fruit Friday. This is episode 8. I can't believe we're already 8 episodes into this podcast. I'm your host, Maddie, or Yajai and Tai, and this week we are talking about a topic that actually inspired this podcast and kind of my desire to share more deeply about my experiences in Thailand. But before we dive into that, this is Fruit Friday, of course, so we have to introduce our fruit, which is banana. There are so many types of bananas available in Thailand. I had no idea the variety that you could find, but I love bananas. I think they're very underrated. They are simple and delicious. They can be put in so many things. They can be baked into so many things. I just love them. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, I feel like I always have to have bananas in the house. Fried bananas, frozen bananas, doesn't matter. I'm interested. Also, if you're not peeling your bananas from the bottom, you're doing it wrong. I hope you know that by now. But if you don't, I'm here to tell you. Good every time. Now, when I buy bananas, I always buy them in a big bunch like this, and it can be hard to eat so many bananas in a short period of time before they get too ripe, which is why, like I said, they're really good to bake into things. But my favorite thing to do with bananas is actually I'll eat 2 or 3 when I first buy them while they're still a decent ripeness. And then I peel the rest of them and I put them in the freezer just in a container. And then anytime I want to make a smoothie, anytime I want to blend up some bananas and oat milk to make kind of a banana ice cream, they're the perfect thing to have. Especially living in Thailand where it's so hot, sometimes you just want a cold, delicious snack. So that's my pro tip with bananas. Have a couple when you buy them and then put the rest in the freezer. You'll thank me later. And that actually is kind of a metaphor for what we're going to talk about today, which is grief. I think when you are grieving abroad, dealing with that grief can be a lot like dealing with a bunch of bananas. You deal with it initially, you have a couple of bananas right when you get them, and then you put the rest in the freezer and you have to revisit it later, usually when you go back home, go back to the place. And I want to talk more about that in today's episode. So thanks for tuning in.
It's Fruit Friday, yeah, let's take a bite. Life's sweet and sour, take it slice by slice. Humor, heart, and wisdom, served just right. Laughing, learning, loving too. Fruit Friday's here with the juice for you.
All right, now before we dive into today's topic, I want to talk a little bit about the inspiration behind this podcast and where I got the idea to start Fruit Friday and wanting to share all of this with you. And it was actually last year when April Jackson invited me to be on her podcast called Babes, How Did You Get Here? And we had a phone call and she started asking me questions about what are some of the most challenging parts about living abroad. And the answers that I gave her really surprised her and really resonated with her. And it made me realize how little we talk about these types of things when we talk about moving abroad. I think that when you're thinking about moving abroad and you're seeking out advice, it's really easy to ask questions about the type of visa you need, how you're going to find a place to live, how you're going to earn money, how you're going to get around, if you'll have a car or a motorbike or taxis or whatever. You might try to consider health insurance and bank accounts, but you really don't consider how you're going to navigate and what it's going to feel like to miss major milestones in the lives of people that you love, or deal with grief from halfway across the world when you lose someone or something that's really important to you, and maybe you can't be there in the moment when it happens to grieve with everyone close to you. I think there are unlimited resources when it comes to trying to move abroad, trying to move to a new place for the first time. There are YouTube channels, TikTok, Instagram, we've got blog posts, we've got the internet, we've got podcasts, we've got friends and connections and contacts. Everyone has a way to ask questions and kind of get set up with the things that they need. But I don't think there are a lot of resources for this very niche experience of navigating grief, dealing with the heavier feelings and the heartache and the unexpected heartbreak that comes sometimes with living abroad. All right, so the first segment of this podcast, I want to talk about grief and what it is like to grieve while you're living abroad. And I want to preface this section by saying that I think grief looks different for everyone. It's not something that I can describe and say will apply to everyone. I'm just going to speak based on my own experiences. I'm also not saying that it's harder for me to grieve because I'm abroad and your grief is not as bad if you're with people in your home. And no, I'm not saying that at all. I'm just speaking on my experience based on grief. But I think that no matter who you are and no matter what you're grieving, be it the loss of a person, the loss of a pet, the loss of a home, a divorce, you know, a tragedy of any kind, whatever you're grieving, I think grief is one of the hardest human emotions to navigate. It is one of the most difficult things that we all have to go through. And unfortunately, there's no roadmap and there's no healing, there's no fixing. That being said, I think the only thing that's more difficult than grieving is having to grieve alone. And when you live abroad, you kind of have to grieve alone twice. And I want to explain that a little bit later in this episode, but I want to start by first just talking about what quote unquote normal experience of grief looks like when you're in your home country, when you're surrounded by your friends and family, and then compare it to how that grief looks like when you're abroad. So when you are living at home, when you are nearby friends and family, usually if you're going to be approaching a season of grief, there are signs, okay? Someone is aging, someone is sick, there have been a series of events that have led you up to the point where you're going to go through this loss. And so you've already kind of maybe mentally prepared and everyone around you has been navigating it at the same time and you know you're headed in this direction. And even when that's not the case, even when there is a tragic accident, there is an unexpected death, there is an unexpected loss, natural disaster, whatever it is, everyone around you has shared that experience. And so while it is tragic and heartbreaking and maybe really unexpected, everyone around you is feeling that. And you kind of have that uniting factor, even though it's a really sad uniting factor, it's something that you can share and it's a mutual understanding that you all are going through and experiencing together. And I think the positive side to these types of scenarios, again, not saying that there's a positive to grief, but I think the silver lining is that you're surrounded by friends and family, and a lot of times these big tragedies and these big losses bring people closer together, and you know, it can heal some other wounds because people are coming together to share the grief and the sadness and the loss and to maybe celebrate the life or the legacy of the person or the thing that's been lost. And when you flip that and you think about how these initial moments of grief look while you're living abroad, it's very, very different. First of all, I think the delivery of bad news when you're abroad is a bit jarring. It can sometimes leave little to no context and not a lot of comfort. For me personally, I have woken up, because I am 12 hours ahead of my family and friends, I've woken up on more occasions than I can count to bad news delivered through a text message that my mom, texted me as soon as something happened, but I was asleep. And then the text is, your dad's in the hospital, so-and-so passed away, so-and-so's not doing well, so-and-so had a heart attack, a stroke, or whatever. And first of all, to wake up and to have that be the first thing that hits you is, it can really just it's jarring. It throws you off. And there were really times that I checked my phone and I couldn't even put the pieces together because the news was so surprising. It was something so unexpected that I was like, oh my God, what? Who? And it took me a minute to catch up and to connect the dots of what had actually happened. And then because of the time difference, by the time I saw the message, my family is asleep and I don't really have anyone to talk to and connect with and get more details on. So then I have to wait another X number of hours before I can get any further details. So I have to sit with all of that news by myself. And I mean, talk about spiraling. When you get hit with a shockwave of bad news and then you get no response, it's so isolating and so heartbreaking and so tragic. And then you just have to wait for more news. Oh my God, I can't even begin to describe how difficult that is. And honestly, it got to a point in the last couple of years where I would get anxiety about checking my phone in the morning. I would be terrified to look at my phone and check my messages because I was so afraid of receiving bad news. And thankfully, things have calmed down. I haven't received much bad news recently, but I still get scared because I'm like, what if I wake up and I've lost someone that I love? And then what do I do? And I think that's not something that you think about before you move abroad. You kind of take it for granted that you're going to see people regularly. But I think, to bring it back to the topic of grief, the reason why it's so hard to receive this kind of news when you're abroad is because Not only are you receiving this heartbreaking and tragic news, you're receiving it alone, and no one else around you really understands. Like I said, when you're home, when you're surrounded by friends and family, you kind of share this space of grief. You all have this mutual understanding of the loss and the gravity of the situation, and that can kind of bring you together, even though you don't have to exchange any words about it. You just know. But when you're abroad, other people around you don't really know the significance of your loss. And in the moment where you are feeling that loss, perhaps at its heaviest, it's not really the time that you want to explain to them how much this person meant to you, or how much this thing or this pet or this, well, again, whatever it is that you're grieving, however much that thing meant to you, and the significance and the impact of this loss on your life, because you're grieving. That's not the thing that you want to do in that moment. And so I think that can feel very isolating and lonely, and it's very difficult to navigate because, like I said, grief is one of the most difficult things that we have to go through, and then to have to go through it without anyone else around you to understand, it can be really hard. And I think those first few days and weeks after you receive this bad news while you're living abroad can also be really disorienting, because it feels like a huge part of your life has changed, and something, has completely rocked your world. And again, when you're home, when you're surrounded by family and friends, I think it's a lot easier for everything in your life to be put on pause, because everyone's life is shifting, right? Everyone is stopping and dealing with the loss. Everyone is, taking their bereavement from work. They're traveling in for funerals or for support, in the cases of maybe natural disasters, or they're shifting their daily lives to deal with the grief and the loss. And that doesn't really happen when you're abroad. Everyone else's life, aside from maybe yours, kind of goes on undisturbed. Everyone's still going to work, everyone's still doing their routines, everyone's still inviting you out for plans. Nothing in your present reality really changes, and that can be really disorienting, because you're like, how can the world possibly keep turning when my world has stopped momentarily? How can I continue to move forward and do my day-to-day tasks when I'm feeling all this heartache and this pain, and I'm not making space to mourn it because the world around me isn't providing me that space? And so that is one of the most difficult parts about grieving abroad. That's kind of the first grief. The first time you have to grieve alone is that moment where you get the news, and then everyone around you is continuing on with their lives, and you're like, I don't know how I can continue like this. The second time you have to grieve alone, and actually I take it back, I think this might be even more difficult, at least it has been in my experience. You have to grieve alone again when you eventually go home, when you eventually go back to the place where that person or the thing, or again, whatever you're grieving, was lost, and you actually have to feel the absence of that thing. You go home and you notice the empty seat at the table. You go home and you're missing that person at your family reunion. You go home and your parents aren't together anymore in the same way that they were. You go home and your pet doesn't run up to jump on you and lick you when you get in the door. It's those moments that I think the grief hits you again, and it hits you just as hard as the news did the first time, and it's just as painful. But again, in this moment, you're alone, because everyone else who dealt with this grief weeks, months, maybe even years ago, they've moved past it. And so again, while they had to go through the same pain and the same hurt and the same loss, they did it at a different time than you. And so while they might be 6 months past their heaviest, darkest moments of grief, you're feeling it all again, almost as if it's the first time, and again, alone. And while you still have people around you to kind of, sympathize with you and to comfort you and to be there for you, it's just not the same when you feel like, I'm going to get emotional just talking about it, like when you feel the absence and the weight of the loss again, when you pull it together, Maddie, when you get home. Yeah, it's really difficult. So I'll tell you a story about how I experienced this, one of the times I experienced this, and this was when my dog died. So I remember a couple of years ago, I always host dinner for my friends. I love to invite people over and make a big dinner and just have community and food and vibes, and it's great. And I get so excited about this. And one night I was in my kitchen, I was cooking up so many dishes. I think I had like 10 people coming over. So I was making a huge dinner. So I'm super busy. And I have my phone playing music sitting next to me in the kitchen, and a message pops up from my dad. And he texted our family group chat and said, just want to let you know, Dixie, our dog, like, died. And he was like, please don't call. I don't feel like talking. Broke my heart. And I'm literally cutting onions, but then also just burst into tears because I'm like, oh my God, my dog, like my pet that I had for 13 years and like this dog that I love so much and was there for so much of my childhood is just gone. And I was like so sad to learn that news and to think about that. But then I also had to kind of pull it together because I had people showing up to my house in 30 minutes and none of them have ever met my dog. And, the plans aren't going to change just because my dog died, but I had to like swallow all that grief, get through the night, and then, be sad about it for the next couple of days. But it was just like so hard to receive that news and then to have to continue on with my normal routine. And I know that happens, sometimes when you're living at home too. It's not just when you're abroad, but this was kind of my first, or it's the example that I want to share. And then I went home. Obviously, I didn't fly home because my dog died. What are you going to do? But I went home 8 months later, and my dog had, my dad had buried the dog, and they'd all moved on. They'd accepted it, they were okay. But I went home, and then to not have my dog run up to me, to not be able to play with her, to walk with her, to like lay on the floor and roll around with her, and then to just see where she was buried, I had to go through that huge moment of grief, that loss, that pain again. And it wasn't, as severe as it can be with the loss of, a person or something else like that. But we're not going to get into that because I don't want to cry on my podcast. But yeah, it was like those double moments of grief. And both times I felt very isolated and very alone. And the reason I wanted to tell this story is not so much that, but I want to give you some advice for how to deal with this grief and how to deal with these big losses and these moments of sadness. And believe what you will about spirituality and divine timing, divine intervention, whatever. I think that when you love someone or something and it leaves you, it leaves this earth, it will find a way to send you a message. It will find a way to tell you before it goes, or as it goes. And if you are open to seeing that and receiving that, I think it can bring a lot of comfort. Here I am getting emotional again. Okay, so again, on the dog example, when my dog died, my mom had left town for the weekend. Whenever she left the house, she would always roll down her window in the car and let the dog know when she would be coming back. And usually she was just, going out for a couple hours or, going somewhere for a day, whatever. And the weekend that my dog died, my mom was going to her parents' house, which is about 3 hours from where my parents live. So she was going to my grandparents' house. And as she was pulling out of the driveway, she rolled down the window and told the dog she'd be back in like 4 days. And my dog, who was old and had arthritis and like was so quiet, so chill, didn't really bark, didn't jump around. This dog jumped in a circle and barked like woof, and then did it again, jumped the other way, barked, and then a third time spun around in a circle, jumped again, and barked. And my mom was like, that's so weird, like I've never seen her do anything like that before, but she didn't really get it. And yeah, so my mom left and went to her grandparents, or my grandparents' house, her parents' house for the weekend. And while she was gone, the dog had passed away. And my mom kind of connected the dots later and was like, I think she was telling me that she loved me. I think she was saying goodbye because she knew she wasn't going to see me again. And I was like, stab me in the heart, Mom. This is such a sad story. But then I had a very similar experience not long after. I went to visit a friend, and this friend had a dog that looked exactly like my dog. Border Collie, same face. And I walked in the room, and me and this dog locked eyes. We'd never met before. And he just like immediately came up onto the couch. There was 5 of us in this apartment, okay? Jumps up on the couch, sits on my lap, and is just like loving all over me. And I felt like it was my dog. I felt like it was the spirit of my dog coming to be like, I love you. I miss you. I'm still here. Like, let me just give you the goodbye I didn't get to give you before. And I don't know, I found a lot of comfort in that. I found a lot of comfort in knowing that I could have that closure in another way. A very similar thing happened again not too long ago. One of my best friend's mom passed away very unexpectedly, and it absolutely broke my heart that I couldn't be there for her. And we're going to talk about dealing with guilt of not being there in just a moment. But in Thailand, it had been stormy, rainy, overcast for at least 2 weeks. Okay, we hadn't had a single sunset. We hadn't really had any blue skies. It was just gray and rainy, and that's just kind of how it is at certain times of the year. You get really overcast skies, really dreary weather. And I remember getting the news that her mom wasn't doing well, and it all kind of happened really fast. It happened in a matter of a couple days. And on the day that she passed, like in the hour that she passed, the skies, the clouds like disappeared from the sky, and we had the most gorgeous sunset. Again, hadn't had a sunset in weeks. It had been raining overcast all day. And the next day it was raining overcast the whole day. It was just like this 1 hour. And in the hour of her mom's passing, that the skies opened up and it was the most beautiful sunset, the most beautiful light like shining up to the heavens, if you will. And I really felt like that was her mom, like saying goodbye to the earth and like showing me that she was going and like letting me know, because actually I didn't even get the news that she had passed until a couple hours after that. But I had, reversed the math and, that was the moment. And I feel like, again, I'm very open to receiving those kind of messages. I'm very open to, I don't know, signs from the universe, if you will. I know people get hung up on the word universe sometimes, and we'll get into that in future episodes. But yeah, I think there are other ways to find comfort in knowing that the things that you love and the people that you love will send their messages to you. They will find a way to communicate with you, even if you're not really there in the moment. But moving on from that, as I said, let's talk a little bit about dealing with guilt, because I think with grief and with grieving from abroad, there's also a lot of guilt that you have to deal with for not being there in moments that you'd really like to be there. And the guilt can come with more than just grief. It can come with moments of celebration, with moments of anything, really. But I think guilt and grief often go hand in hand. So let's talk a little bit about that. We talked about FOMO already on previous episodes, and how when you live abroad, sometimes you get FOMO because everyone at home is doing things without you and you're missing out. And I think the FOMO and the guilt kind of compound when you're missing really big milestone moments in someone's life. So again, things like death, when people are going through loss and when they're grieving and you can't be there to support them. Maybe they're going through a really difficult breakup or divorce. Maybe it's something really exciting like an engagement or a wedding, or maybe a graduation or a big milestone in their career or the opening of a business. And those are all really exciting moments that you often have to miss just because you're living so far away. And that can make you feel really guilty. That can be really hard, especially when these are moments in the lives of people that really mean a lot to you and people that you really love. Because if I was a millionaire, if I had unlimited money, like I would love to be able to be home for my friends' birthdays and every time someone has a baby and every time someone has a big milestone moment, but I just can't be. That's just the reality. And it's also just, even if money wasn't an object, I also have my life and my commitments and things. And again, we all have to pick and choose what we do. And I know this happens both when you're living in your home country and when you're living abroad, but I think it's extra difficult when you're abroad because the distance and the cost to get home is an extra barrier on top of all of your regular life commitments. And yeah, you can just feel really guilty sometimes when you can't be there, even though were you home, you would be at someone's door in an hour. I think there have been several moments like this for me where I've had friends go through really difficult breakups, and if I was at home, I would have been in my car at their front door, giving them the biggest hug and just like sitting with them, eating ice cream, drinking wine, whatever we had to do to navigate that breakup. And same thing with divorce, with death, with celebrations. Like I wish I could have been there to celebrate someone's getting their master's degree or someone opening their first business. And sometimes you just can't be there. And when that happens, sometimes these feelings of selfishness can creep in and you start to think like, am I a bad friend? Am I a bad sister? Am I a bad daughter? My bad granddaughter because I'm not there for these things. And I think with every event where there's varying levels of desire of actually wanting to be there or feeling like you should be there out of obligation. But regardless, if you're living abroad, eventually there's going to be something that you really have to miss out on. Something you would really rather not miss, you're going to have to say no to. And that's really hard. That can make you feel guilty. That can make you feel selfish. And I think this brings us really nicely into my next point, which is how do you manage these feelings of guilt? And how do you manage this grief so that it's a little bit easier to deal with, even though you're halfway across the world? Because, again, I've been through this chapter several times. Unfortunately, they just repeat over and over. That is life. But I think I have found ways that have made it easier on me, and hopefully by sharing them, it might make a difference for you as well. My first lesson is to manage your guilt with creativity. I'm a really creative girl, so I have a lot of fun with this, but I think it can be difficult for some people. But what I mean by that is if you feel guilty about not being able to be there for someone in a big moment in their life, get creative. Find ways to show up for them, even from halfway across the world. This can be done in so many ways. A very simple way is by calling them. Get on the phone, call them. If you can't catch them on the phone, send them a video note. Record yourself talking, record a voice note, record a video, and send it to them, and just send them your love, send them your wishes, and do this repeatedly, as often as you need to feel like you're supporting them, and as often as you think they need to hear it. Because even if they can't respond in the moment, and even if you can't actually connect face to face or over the phone, they can still receive your messages. They can come to them when they're ready to listen to them. And I'm sure that it brings a lot of comfort. And I know that it brings a lot of comfort for me when people send me voice notes and messages, even when they're across the world. Like, encouragement and love can be felt in that way, regardless of where you are. Another creative way that I like to be there for someone, to be involved in these moments in their life, is to send a quick Venmo, $5, $10, whatever, just to be like, hey, have a drink on me, or have a coffee on me, or hey, I want to order this thing for you off of Amazon or whatever, just like sending a little gift, something thoughtful to remind them that you're thinking of them, to take part in this day, even if you couldn't really be there. I think that can go a long way, and it can be, again, really meaningful and a creative way to feel like you're being there for them, even if you can't really be there for them. Another fun thing that I like to do is to do something to honor that person or that thing or that event wherever I am. So if my friend accomplishes something great, I go out and celebrate, and I send pictures and be like, hey, I'm doing this for you. I'm thinking of you, like I'm cheering you on. Doing something to honor them can be also in the same sense like a memorial. Take a moment to be like, I went to this spot, this beautiful spot, to reflect on the impact so-and-so has had on my life before they passed, and I just wanted you to know. Just being able to hold space for that person, that moment, in your own space where you are, is just as powerful, just as impactful as actually being with them physically together in the same place. Another thing I love to do, belated celebrations. I love a reason to celebrate. Everyone, come on, who doesn't love a reason to celebrate, And it's so exciting to go home after you've been gone for a long time and to have so many things to catch up on and be like, let's celebrate your new job. Let's celebrate your breakup. Let's celebrate your new degree. Like, let's get together and be happy for each other and for the things that we've accomplished in this time away. And I think those moments can also be really special. So just know that even when there's sadness in missing something, and when there's feelings of selfishness creeping in because you're missing something that is really important to someone or that is really important to you, there are ways to manage it, and you can get creative about it. And just because you're not there doesn't mean you're not there for them. You just have to reframe what it looks like to be there for someone and to support someone, because support can happen in so many ways. Next, and a little bit more difficult, I want to talk about managing grief. And again, like I said at the beginning of this episode, grief looks different for everyone. There's no cookie cutter solution to grief, and there's not one right way to grieve. So again, I'm just offering advice based on what has worked for me and what has brought me comfort in some of my saddest, most difficult moments of living abroad. And there's a few things that I like to do when I'm dealing with loss so far away from home. The first one is I schedule time to grieve. And I know that sounds silly, but as I mentioned before, because your present reality doesn't really stop, because no one else around you is feeling the weight of that loss, it's really easy to just try to charge forward and move on with your life without really sitting with the significance of what you've lost and the impact that this event is going to have on your life. And so I think it's really important to make time to feel those feelings, to kind of sit with the heaviness, to sit with the hurt, to sit with the heartbreak. And I know that's not fun and those aren't fun feelings to have, but they're really important. I think one of my favorite quotes from my leadership minor, one of my professors asked us this question was, do you feel a vocation to be fully human? And that means, like, to be fully human, you have to be able to feel all of your emotions and to sit with all of your emotions and to know the range of emotions that you possess. So it's not just sitting with the joys and the happiness and forgetting the rest. It's like feeling the darkest depths of your sorrow so that you can know the greatest highs and the greatest joys. And so in that sense, you have to make time to grieve. You have to sit with those feelings and allow them to pass through you and allow them to exist within your body and to move out, to feel those things. It's like kind of a wave. It washes over you, and sometimes it's stronger, sometimes it recedes and it comes back, and it keeps coming, and it comes in waves. And when those waves come, you need to sit with them. You need to hold space for them. You need to let them move through you and know that it's not something that has to happen in a certain amount of time. Know that it's not something that you need to fight. It's just something that you have to feel. And if you can make space for those feelings and just acknowledge them and sit with them, even if you have to do it alone, it's really important in moving through the process of grief. Because if you just bottle them up and you push them down and you try not to think about it, eventually it will catch up to you and it's going to be even more painful then. So just make time to grieve. And second thing, kind of like with the guilt, is do something to honor the person, the thing that you've lost. Share memories, talk about them with your community that's immediately surrounding you. Tell them, once you're starting to feel maybe a little bit better, about your favorite memories with this person or favorite memories in this place or with this thing, this animal. And share, because that's kind of what you do when you grieve with your family and friends. You all come together and you relive the happy moments, you do the remember whens, you look at photos, you just kind of celebrate the life of the person or the legacy of the thing. And you can still do that when you are abroad. And it can be a really fun way to deepen your connection with your community members, with your friends, to really be vulnerable in these moments and share things about that. And in the same way, you can show up for someone. If you are living abroad and you have a friend who's going through something like this, ask questions in that vein. Tell me about that person that you lost. What impact did they have on your life? What was your favorite thing about them? What's your favorite memory with them? I think that's a great way to deepen friendships and to also help someone or yourself get through the process of grief. And then finally, with dealing with grief while you're abroad, just like I said, make space for it when it happens. Make space for it again when you go home. Like, kind of brace for impact when you go home, knowing that you're going to feel the weight of the loss, and make time for it. It's okay that everyone else has kind of moved on and you haven't yet. It's okay that you might need a couple of days to process and to adjust. And it's okay if you need to take things slow and you need to talk to people about it when you're there. And again, you have to feel those feelings. You have to go through the process of grieving. And even though you might be doing it on a different timeline as other people, it's just as important for you to do it as you need to do it, just like everyone else had to go through it. So just because your family grieved the loss of something or someone 6 months ago, and it took them, let's say 3 months to get back to normal. Again, there's no getting back to normal, but, they moved through it. When you go home and you get that shock again, like, you're going to need just as much time. And that's okay. You don't have to feel like you need to catch up in someone else's process of grief. There's no race. Grief isn't a race to the finish, It's just something that you get through. It's never easy to navigate. There's no right or wrong way to do it, and it looks different on everyone. So these are just my best tips based on what I've experienced, and I hope that that is helpful for you as well. The best tip that I can give you, both for managing guilt and for grief, and something that I, again, have found a lot of comfort in, is having an emergency trip home fund. Especially if you're someone who's planning on staying abroad long term, you want to live abroad for the foreseeable future, or you want to be gone for longer than just, 6 months, a year, whatever. Having money set aside that could get you home in an emergency, or not even an emergency, just on like an unplanned trip, is such a huge security blanket and such a huge comfort. I know that that's not always financially logistical, especially if you're living abroad with a partner and kids, and maybe, you have a job that doesn't allow you to leave at any time. But I think removing the hurdle of traveling home And just having one less barrier in your way can make dealing with grief or navigating guilt a lot easier. Because if you absolutely had to go home, you don't have to say no because of finances. And I think that can just be a huge weight off of your shoulders. And this doesn't have to be money that's spent to grieve. It could also be money spent on celebration or surprise or just to connect and have quality time with family. But again, it's just so nice to know that the option is there if I needed it. You know, if I needed to get on a flight home tomorrow, I could buy a flight home tomorrow. Obviously, there's going to be things that you have to say no to. Obviously, you can't go home for everything, but just having that emergency fund to be able to tap into if you need to is a huge weight off your shoulders. So if that's possible for you and that is something that you can prepare for, I highly recommend having that on hand. So with that, I want to leave you with a little bit of fruit for thought today. And I'm sorry that this is a little bit dark. If you are currently thinking about moving abroad, or if you have just moved abroad, or you've been living abroad for a long time, I want you to ask yourself, how do you plan to grieve when tragedy strikes at home? Is it your plan to go home and grieve with your friends and family there? Or are you going to grieve from abroad? And normally I preach that you should not dress rehearse your tragedies. I say this all the time to my friends. I think that it is completely a waste of time and energy to try to prepare for the pain of loss and to dress rehearse what it's going to feel like to have your heart broken by something and to lose something or someone that's really important to you, because it's going to hurt just as bad when it happens for real. So there's no sense in preparing for it. And no matter how much you try to prepare, no matter how much you try to feel in advance how it's going to hurt to try to shield yourself from the pain, it's going to hurt. So there's no sense in feeling the pain twice, okay? But I do think when you're living abroad, it's important to think about and have a plan for how you're going to navigate those moments, because they will happen. They will come up expectedly or unexpectedly, and you're going to have to get through them. And I think if you don't have to deal with the difficult decision making, if you've already kind of made a decision, or you don't have to make a definite decision, but if you already have an idea about how you'd like to approach these situations, I think it can just make things a little bit easier. So think about, what kind of moments do you want to be home for? What kind of moments are you maybe okay with navigating from abroad? Which people in your lives are people that you would absolutely travel home for? Which ones would you maybe not? And that is kind of dark and morbid to think about. But again, it's serious, you know, like some people are going to pass away and you're not going to go home for their funerals, and other people will pass away and you might be on the next flight back. And it is what it is. Circumstances can change everything. Timing can change everything. Finances can change everything. But the reality is, some things you'll say yes to, some things you'll say no to. And so think about that. And think about the likelihood of those things maybe occurring. If you have aging relatives, aging parents, if you have friends that are going to be going through big milestone moments, think about the kinds of things that you want to be able to go home for and kind of make plans for that, so that when those moments come, you're a little bit more prepared for them. So that's my fruit for thought for you this week. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to Fruit Friday. I really appreciate it, and I have loved sharing this space with all of you. Next week, we are going to be talking about the identity crisis that comes with living abroad, when you feel like kind of an outsider everywhere you go. So make sure you come back and join me for that. But until then, please like this episode, follow Fruit Friday wherever you get your podcasts, share it on your stories. I would love to hear what you've been thinking about these episodes and how they've had an impact on you, if they have already. So that's it. Thank you so much for listening, and happy Friday.
Take one last bite of that juicy slice. Fruit for thought, sounding oh so nice. Human heart of wisdom, served just right. Laughing, learning, loving too. Fruit Friday's here with the juice for you.